You fucked my own father in my bed, in my house, Ghard roared, grabbing her arms and driving her backward. Her heel hit empty air. The cliff was right behind her. Just seconds ago, they were smiling for birthday photos. Now he was on top of her, slamming a rock into her skull again and again, right where he had once knelt and asked her to marry him. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. It was one of those bright Hawaiian mornings where the sun came up. Ariel Coig opened her eyes in their house on Oahu. This was her birthday. Down in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and pancakes hit her before she even got downstairs. Their son Emil was already there, flipping eggs at the stove, and Ghard was leaning against the counter with that half-smill. Folks who knew them always said the Coigs looked like the kind of family you saw in those old magazine ads, the ones that made you a little jealous because they seemed so solid. Ariel and Ghard had been together long enough that people at church and the neighborhood barbecues would nudge each other and say, "Now that's what real love looks like after 20-some years." They had their ups and downs like anybody, sure, but when they were good, they were the couple everybody pointed to and wished they had. Emil looked up from the pan and grinned. "Morning, Mom. Happy birthday. I was thinking I could tag along on that hike today. Pali Trail's supposed to be pretty cool this time of year." Ghard set his coffee down and walked over, putting an arm around Ariel's waist right there in front of their son. He pulled her close, the way he used to when they were first married, and kissed her slow and easy on the lips. "Nah, buddy," he said, voice warm and steady. "This one's for your mom and me. We need a little parents-only time. You hold down the fort here. Maybe get some studying done so your old man doesn't have to nag you later." He gave Ariel another quick kiss, right on the forehead this time, and winked at her like they shared some private joke. Emil rolled his eyes, but he was laughing. "Get a room, you two. Seriously, I'm right here." The three of them stood there in the kitchen for a minute, plates clinking, coffee steaming, and it really did feel like one of those perfect family mornings you see in the movies. Ariel caught herself smiling bigger than she had in months. This was the Ghard she had married, the guy who still knew how to make her feel safe and wanted. They finished breakfast, packed a couple of water bottles and some snacks, and headed out the door with Emil waving them off from the porch. "Have fun, lovebirds," he called, and they both waved back like they didn't have a care in the world. The drive up to the Pali Trail didn't take long. When they parked and started walking, the air felt fresh, and the trail opened up with those steep green cliffs and ocean views that always made you stop and just breathe. Ghard stayed right beside her the whole way, talking about little things. How Emil was growing up too fast, how the neighbor's dog had dug up their yard again, the usual husband and wife stuff that felt easy for once. Every so often he'd pull out his phone and say, "Hey, let's get one right here," and they'd pose together with the wind in their hair and the valley stretching out behind them. They kept sending snaps back to the family group chat, the whole hike up. Ariel would tap out a quick message, "Best birthday hike ever," and hit send. Ghard leaned in for another shot, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling like they meant it. Pretty soon, the replies started coming in from relatives and friends, heart emojis, "You two look so happy," and goals right there. It really did look perfect from the outside. Nobody would guess there had been nights when Ariel lay awake wondering if their marriage was finally done. They walked on, the trail getting narrower in spots but still manageable. Ghard stayed close, pointing out little things along the way and making sure she stepped where the ground looked solid. He'd reach out and touch her elbow now and then, guiding her just a bit. The higher they climbed, the quieter the trail got. The wind picked up a little, whistling through the rocks. Ghard suggested one more picture near a spot where the path ran right along a sheer drop. He positioned her just so, his hand firm on her back, and snapped the shot. "There, that one's a keeper," he said. Ariel nodded and smiled for the camera. They started heading down the slope toward the next section, the one that hugged the cliff even tighter. That's when the talking slowed. Ghard went quiet. The only sound was the wind cutting across the mountain and the crunch of their boots on the loose rock. Ariel glanced over at him. His face looked the same as it had all morning, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. She opened her mouth to ask if everything was okay, but the words didn't come. The silence stretched out longer than it should have. The trail dipped, and the edge of the drop got closer with every step. She had no way of knowing that the perfect morning was already over. Just a few more steps, and her life was about to split cleanly in two. By the time Ariel and Ghard reached the narrower stretch of trail near the cliff, the morning had already lost some of its warmth, though not in any way she could have clearly named. The path there was uneven and edged by a drop so steep it could make even a steady person step more carefully. The wind came through in strong bursts, lifting loose strands of her hair and pushing at the back of her shirt, and below them the island fell away in layers of green and stone and distance. It was the kind of view people stopped for, the kind that made tourists pull out their phones and locals pause anyway because some places never stop being dangerous just because they are beautiful. Ghard slowed first. He turned halfway toward her, then glanced toward the open edge as if measuring something she could not see. His face looked calm enough on the surface, but the ease from earlier was gone. Not replaced by anger exactly, not yet. It was something tighter than that, something held in place with effort. "Stop here a second," he said. "Look at that." Ariel did stop. She was breathing a little harder from the hike, and she welcomed the excuse to stand still. She followed his gaze out toward the view, then toward the place where the trail widened just enough for two people to stand near the drop if they were careful. The air felt cooler there. She rubbed one hand over her arm and looked out over the cliffs. "It is beautiful," she said quietly. He did not answer right away. He kept looking at her instead of the view. Then he asked, "Do you know where this is?" The question caught her off guard. She looked around again, this time with more care. The trees had grown in thicker in some places. The ground looked different from what she remembered on older hikes, and time had a way of changing even the places people swore they would never forget. Still, there was something about the bend in the trail, the open drop, the shape of the ridge beyond it, something that tugged at memory without fully giving itself up. "It looks familiar," she said. "I just can't place it." He gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. It was dry, flat, almost bitter enough to taste. "This," he said, looking around as if the ground itself had insulted him, "is where I propose to you." For a moment, Ariel only stared at him. Then it hit her all at once. The old picture in her mind, the younger version of them, the shock and joy of that day, the ring, the way she had cried and laughed at the same time. She looked back at the trail and tried to lay the memory over the present, but the years did not line up neatly. The brush looked thicker. The path seemed more worn down. Maybe the weather had changed parts of it. Maybe she had changed more than the trail had. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Oh my God, I didn't realize. It's changed so much up here, I didn't recognize it." He kept staring at her. The silence that followed did not feel like the silence of memory. It felt like judgment. Ariel gave a small, uneasy smile, trying to step around whatever had just opened between them. "I mean, it has been a while. Things look different. That's all." His jaw tightened. She saw it before she saw anything else. A muscle moved once near the side of his face. Then his eyes changed. That was the part she would remember later, the clearest and the worst. It was as if something dropped behind them, some last cover or restraint, and what came forward in its place was darker, flatter, emptied of anything human she knew how to trust. He moved before she fully understood he was moving. There was no warning, no build-up in his voice, no last angry speech to prepare her. 1 second he was standing in front of her, and the next he came at her so fast and so hard that her body reacted before her mind could catch up. His hands clamped around both her upper arms with a force that made pain flash white under her skin. He drove her backward toward the edge. "You just lost your last chance. We're standing at the place I proposed to you, and you don't even recognize it. Why should I show you any mercy?" The words came out low and savage, each one bitten off like he had been carrying them in his mouth for a long time. Ariel stumbled, her shoes scraping loose dirt and rock. For one sick instant, she felt open air behind her and thought she was already going over. She twisted hard, trying to pull free, but his grip only tightened. Her heart slammed so violently in her chest it almost hurt more than his hands. "Ghard, stop," she gasped. "What are you doing?" He did not stop. He shoved again, and this time she lost her footing completely. Her heel slipped on stone, and her body went down hard. The impact knocked the breath out of her so fast she could not even scream. Before she could roll or crawl or think, he was on top of her, one knee pinning her, one arm pressing her down, his weight heavy and terrible and real in a way her mind still did not want to accept. This was not rage in passing, not a fight gone too far, not some wild moment that would break and leave them both stunned. This was a man trying to kill her. Panic hit in full then, hot and total. Ariel bucked under him and grabbed at whatever she could reach, but he was stronger, and he had leverage and surprise on his side. She felt her back against the rough ground, felt roots and loose stones digging into her shoulder blades, felt the pull of the cliff somewhere too near behind her. Then she saw his hand go toward his pack. At first, her mind did not make sense of what it was seeing. Then it did, and the understanding came with a shock so sharp it almost froze her. He pulled out a syringe. In his other hand was a small vial. For a second, she could only stare. That was the moment she understood he had not snapped on the trail in some blind rush of anger. He had brought something with him. He had carried it up the mountain. He had thought ahead. No, she choked out, and everything in her body turned into one desperate, ugly burst of survival. As he brought the syringe down, Ariel thrashed sideways and slammed her hand against his wrist. The syringe skidded away. She grabbed at the vial too, barely catching it with her fingertips before she flung it out into the brush. She did not know what it was, and in that moment, she did not care. She only knew it could not stay in his hands. That changed him. Whatever cold purpose had been holding him together cracked into something meaner and more frantic. His face twisted. He looked less like a man now than like a person stripped down to one burning thought. "You bitch," he shouted, leaning so close she could smell his breath over the dirt and blood and wind. Ariel was crying now, not because she wanted to, but because her body had moved past choice. "I didn't do anything. Please, just stop. Don't lie to me." His voice jumped, broke, then rose again. "Don't you lie to me now. I know about the cheating. I know all of it. I know about him." She shook her head wildly, trying to get air into her lungs, trying to push him off, trying to figure out which version of the truth he thought he knew and whether any answer at all could still reach him. He was beyond listening. She could see that. Still, people beg because the body wants one more chance. "Ghard, please, please listen to me." But he was no longer talking to understand. He was talking to wound. "My own father?" he screamed. "My own father? You brought him into my house? Into my bed? Into my bathroom? You did that to me and thought I wouldn't find out?" Each accusation came like another blow before the actual blows started. His voice cracked with a kind of hurt so deep it had turned poisonous. He was not simply angry. He was unraveling in front of her, tearing through memory and humiliation and betrayal until there was nothing left in him but a need to punish. "I know what you did," he said again, almost choking on the words now. "I know where you were. I know what happened in my room. In my house. You made a fool out of me." Ariel tried to answer, but he was too far gone to hear words the way sane people hear them. Her hands were up now, pushing at his chest, clawing at his arms, trying only to create space. She screamed, not with any plan left in it, only terror. He kept yelling over her, his words broken apart by rage, asking why, asking how she could do that to him, spitting out pieces of accusation, pieces of pain, pieces of humiliation, the affair, his father, the bed, the bathroom, the family. Everything tangled together until his voice sounded torn raw from the force of it. Ariel fought the only ways she had left. She twisted her head and bit down hard on his forearm. When it came near enough, hard enough to taste blood and skin and dirt, he cursed and jerked, but not enough. Her right hand shot lower and squeezed with every ounce of strength fear had left in her body. It was not graceful. It was not planned. It was survival. He grunted, his weight shifting for a second, and Ariel used that second to gasp out words between screams. Then his right hand reached beside her head and came back with a rock. It was jagged, heavy enough to fit into his palm with purpose. The first strike landed across her face and temple so hard the world flashed white. The second came before she had fully felt the first. Then another, and another. The sound of it was what she would remember almost as much as the pain. The thick crack of stone against bone and flesh, close and ugly and unreal, except it was happening to her. Blood spilled fast, hot and blinding, running into her eye, down the side of her face, into her mouth. She tried to turn away, but the ground trapped her. The sky lurched in and out above her. Every hit seemed to shake the whole mountain. The rock came down again. Ariel felt the blow across the side of her head and temple, then another across her forehead, then another near her cheekbone. Each strike landed with a dull, sick sound that seemed too big for one body to hold. Blood poured faster now, warm and slick, running into her left eye until she could barely tell sky from ground. The pain came in waves so sharp they almost seemed to erase thought itself, but the deeper terror was that her body was starting to go numb in places, and numbness felt too much like surrender. She could not surrender. That knowledge came from somewhere lower than thought, deeper than language. It was not courage. It was not dignity. It was a plain, animal refusal to die under him. Ariel twisted again, this time not trying to overpower him because she knew she could not, but trying to ruin his balance, trying to make every inch of her body difficult to control. She threw her shoulder sideways, kicked out, clawed at his wrist, grabbed at the hand with the rock, and when his forearm crossed too close to her mouth again, she bit as hard as she could. Harder than before. Hard enough that he yelled and jerked instinctively. He pulled back for a second, and Ariel used the second. Her hand dropped again, her fingers closing with desperate force where she knew she could hurt him. She did not think about it. She did not hesitate. She squeezed until her own knuckles ached. He made a low, strangled sound and lurched forward, his weight shifting off-center. It was not enough to free her, but it was enough to give her space to breathe and enough to remind her that he was still flesh, still vulnerable, still a body that could be hurt. The problem was that pain only seemed to make him madder. He slammed his forearm across her shoulder and neck, pinning her down again, while his voice rose into something rough and unsteady. He was still talking, still accusing, still throwing pieces of humiliation at her like he needed to hear them out loud in order to keep doing what he was doing. He said he knew about the affair. He said he knew about his father. He said she had dragged filth into his house, onto his bed, into his bathroom, into every corner of his life. The words tumbled over one another, some shouted, some half-spoken, some barely clear, but all of them carried the same sick certainty that he had been replaying these ideas long before he ever brought her to the trail. Ariel tried to answer him once, then again, but he was beyond conversation now. It did not matter what she said or how she said it. He was not listening for truth. He was listening only for the echo of his own injury. Still, she kept pleading, because pleading was one more form of resistance. Ghard, please, listen to me. This is not going to fix anything. Please stop. He hit her again. Her head rang. The world tilted. The cliff behind her felt closer than ever, though she could no longer clearly see it. She felt stones under her back, roots digging into her shoulder blade, dirt packed beneath her nails, and somewhere in the middle of all that pain, the awful awareness that if he dragged her just a little farther, or if either of them shifted the wrong way, gravity would finish what he had started. The air on the ridge had changed too. It no longer felt like weather, it felt like pressure. Wind tore through the gap and seemed to carry every sound farther than it should. Her screams, his breathing, the scrape of shoes against dirt, the crack of stone hitting flesh. She heard herself making noises she did not recognize as her own. Then she understood something with absolute clarity. No appeal to his memory would save her. No appeal to their marriage would save her. No appeal to what was fair or sane or decent would save her. There was only the next second, then the next one after that. So Ariel stopped trying to pull him back into himself and started fighting only to live. She threw both hands up over her face when she could. She jammed her forearm between the rock and her skull once, taking the blow there instead. She bucked her hips hard to throw off his balance. She dug her heel into the ground and pushed. She twisted her head away from the rock and used her teeth whenever she had any target close enough to bite. It was ugly and frantic and uncoordinated, but it forced him to keep adjusting, and every adjustment meant time. Time was life. Somewhere in the middle of that chaos, Ariel screamed words instead of just sounds, not because she had a plan, but because language was still one weapon left to her. Help! He's trying to kill me! The words tore out of her raw and high and desperate. She did not know if anyone was close enough to hear. The trail was not empty, but it was not crowded either, and people on hikes do not always understand what they are hearing until it is too late. Still, she screamed it again. Help me! Call the police. Ghard cursed and grabbed at her face with his free hand, trying to cover her mouth, trying to shut down the sound. Ariel turned her head and bit the heel of his hand so hard he yanked it back on reflex. She screamed again, louder than before, and this time the cry seemed to leave her body and bounce off the ridge. For a moment, there was nothing but wind. Then a voice answered. It was faint at first, somewhere down the trail or around the bend. A woman's voice, alarmed. Unsure of exactly what she was seeing, but certain enough to react. Then another voice joined it, sharper, frightened. We hear you. Ariel's whole body jolted with a kind of hope, so sudden it almost felt painful. She tried to lift her head, though blood slid over one eye and into her mouth. Call 911! She screamed back. Please! Call the police! The women shouted again. Louder this time, their voices carrying across the open ridge. "We're calling 911!" That changed everything. Ghard froze, not fully, not cleanly, but enough. The force of him shifted from attack to shock. He turned his head toward the sound. His arms stopped in mid-motion. His breathing stayed ragged, but his focus broke apart for one critical instant under the realization that other people had heard, that there were witnesses now, that the world beyond his rage had rushed back in. Ariel did not wait. She dragged one knee under herself, then another, though the movement sent pain shooting through her head so violently she thought she might black out. She pushed at the ground and slid sideways, away from him, away from the exact place where he had pinned her. Her palms slipped in dirt and blood. The ground felt unstable. Her balance was nearly gone, but she kept moving. Behind her, she heard him stand or half stand, heard loose gravel shift under his shoes. She did not look back. She could not afford to. Looking back would mean losing time, and time still meant life. She crab-crawled at first because her legs would not answer her properly. Her body shook so badly that every movement felt separate from the one before it, as if she were pulling herself forward in pieces. The cliff remained somewhere at her side or behind her, impossible to track now except by the cold emptiness she could feel whenever the wind pushed too hard. She kept one hand out in front of her, searching for the line of the trail, for brush, for anything solid that was not open air. Her breathing had turned ragged and wet. Blood from her scalp and face kept dripping into her eyes. She wiped at it with the back of her hand, only smearing it farther. The world narrowed to fragments. Dirt, rock, roots, sky, the pounding inside her head, and the voices of strangers somewhere ahead. Behind her, the mountain went strangely quiet. That was what frightened her almost as much as the attack itself. She expected to hear him charging after her, expected the scrape of shoes over loose rock, expected his hands on her again. Instead, there was a silence that felt wrong, measured, almost calm. It was the silence of someone who believed the next part of the day still belonged to him. When Ariel finally forced herself to turn her head just enough to look back, what she saw made her stomach drop. Ghard was not chasing her. He was standing near the place where he had nearly killed her, breathing hard but no longer wild in his movements. He bent down with no urgency at all, picked up his phone, looked at the screen, and then brought it to his ear as if he had all the time in the world. That sight, simple as it was, chilled her in a deeper way than his shouting had. A man in a blind rage was one thing. A man who could step out of attempted murder and calmly make a call was something else. She turned away and kept crawling. The two women were closer now, though still far enough that she could only make out shape and motion. One had a phone to her ear. The other stood turned halfway up the trail, watching the area behind Ariel with the rigid posture of somebody ready to run if she had to. They did not come rushing forward. The danger was too open, the trail too narrow, and Ghard was still back there somewhere with room to move. But they stayed. They kept calling out to her, and that mattered. "We're here," one of them shouted. "Keep coming. Police are on the way." Ariel tried to answer, but what came out was more breath than voice. She kept dragging herself downhill until the women moved in enough to reach her without stepping too close to the upper part of the trail. One of them crouched and caught her by the arm. The other flinched and looked past her at the blood. "Oh my God," the woman whispered, and then louder into the phone. "She's alive. She's moving. She's hurt bad." Ariel tried to rise and nearly collapsed. Her legs would not hold her fully, so the women took her under the arms and half lifted, half guided her down the trail. Every step jarred her head. The mountain seemed to tilt left, then right. Her vision narrowed and opened in waves. More than once, she thought she might black out, but fear kept her anchored. She kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Ghard closing the gap. He never did. That fact would stay with her later, long after the swelling went down and the bandages came off. He did not run after her in a panic. He did not even rush. He stayed behind, made his calls, and let the next part unfold. On Maui, Emil Koig was still at home when his phone lit up for the first time. It was FaceTime, his father. The morning had been ordinary until then, and maybe that was part of what made the call feel so wrong the second he answered. Ghard's face filled the screen, but it did not look like the face Emil had seen at breakfast. He had on sunglasses. His dry-fit shirt was marked with blood. The background behind him looked exposed, rocky, open to sky and cliff. For a moment, Emil did not understand what he was seeing. Then his father spoke, and the confusion gave way to cold shock. He told Emil he was not coming back to Maui. He said Ariel had been cheating on him. He said he had tried to kill her. He said the blood on his shirt was hers. Then, with a steadiness that made the words worse, not better, he said he was going to jump. Emil's whole body locked up. He told him not to. He asked questions that did not come out in any order. Where was Ariel? What happened? Why would he say that? But Ghard did not answer in a way that made sense to a son trying to hold on to reality. He spoke like a man who had already stepped outside of ordinary consequences. When the call ended, Emil sat frozen for a second, staring at the screen like it might explain itself. Then instinct took over. He ran to the house of Judith and Peter Mast, Ariel's parents, because they lived only a minute away. By the time he got there, he was shaking so hard he could barely get the words out. He told them what Ghard had said. He told them about the blood. He told them about Ariel. He told them his father said he was going to jump. Judith tried Ariel immediately. No answer. She checked location sharing on her phone. Ariel's phone was still showing on the Pali side of Oahu, fixed there, not moving. That made everything real. Then, at 11:46 am, Emil's phone rang again. Another FaceTime call from his father. This time the image was even worse, because Emil knew what he was looking at. The background showed rocks, trees, open sky. Ghard asked if he had told anybody. Emil said yes. He told him he had told Judy, Pete, and his mother. Ghard took that in without surprise, almost as if he expected it, and then he said again that he was just going to jump. He repeated it more than once. He said he needed to go before the police caught him. He said he was at the end of his rope. He said he had been thinking about suicide for months. Emil begged him not to do it, but the call ended with the same awful unreality as the first. Once it was over, the whole family machinery of alarm moved fast. Calls went out. Information got relayed from Maui to Oahu. Police were given the trail area, the location data, the statements from the son, the possibility that Ariel had been attacked, and that Ghard was still somewhere near the cliff with suicidal intent. By the time Ariel was being brought off the trail by emergency responders, the mountain above had become an active search zone. On Oahu, Honolulu police moved first, then more units followed. Because of the nature of the incident, the location, and the threat that Ghard might either flee or jump, federal support came in as well. The sound of aircraft reached the trail before Ariel fully understood what it meant. A helicopter cut through the air overhead, the blades thumping low and hard against the wind. On the ground, officers spread out along access points and trail segments, trying to close distance without forcing a desperate man off the edge. Somewhere above, Ghard remained near the cliff. He had not disappeared. He had not made any meaningful effort to run. That unnerved the responding officers because it suggested a man past normal self-preservation, and those men are often the hardest to predict. He stood near the same open drop where he had attacked Ariel, the wind working at his clothes, his body language unsteady but not frantic. At times he looked like he might move away. At times he drifted closer to the edge. Commands were shouted. He was told to show his hands. He was told not to move. He shouted back for them not to come near him. The standoff stretched in moments, not minutes. Each second carried too much weight. From below and around the ridge, officers tightened the perimeter. The helicopter stayed overhead. Agents with the FBI joined the operation, moving with the caution of people who knew that one bad approach could end with a fall no one could stop. Ghard stood near the drop in that strange middle place between defiance and collapse. A man who had nearly killed his wife and was now facing the sudden return of the whole outside world. Then the opening came. He shifted attention toward one side, either at a shouted command or the sound overhead, and that brief loss of focus was enough. The takedown team moved fast, covering ground in a burst and hitting him before he could step back or throw himself forward. It happened close enough to the cliff that more than one officer would later remember the wind and the loose rock underfoot. But they got him down. Hands on arms, weight on shoulders, control on the legs, then cuffs. Just like that, the immediate danger ended. Not the damage, not the consequences, but the next death did not happen. Ariel arrived at Queens Medical Center in critical condition. Her injuries were severe. The wounds to her head and face told the story before she could. The blood loss, the swelling, the shock, the blunt force trauma, all of it placed her in that narrow place where survival depends on speed, skill, and luck. Doctors worked on stabilizing her. Family flew in from Maui. Judith and Peter reached the hospital carrying the full collapse of a day that had begun with birthday hopes and family snapshots. The fact that Ariel lived was spoken of afterward like a miracle. But miracles do not erase damage. They only interrupt death. While she fought her way through treatment and the first stunned hours after the attack, Ghard was processed into custody and faced the charge that fit what had happened on the mountain: attempted murder. As investigators began putting the case together, the truth did not come in one piece. It came in layers. Ariel's account, Emil's account of the FaceTime calls, the statements from the women who heard the screaming, the physical evidence on the trail, the phone records, the location data, the injuries. Each part confirmed another. Each part stripped away any excuse that this had been an accident, a mutual struggle, or a brief loss of temper. The syringe in the vial, the attack near the cliff, the blows with the rock, the admissions afterward to his son, all of it pointed the same way. This had not been random. It had not been sudden in the way people use that word to soften evil. It had intent behind it. As the story spread through both families, the shock settled in with different faces. Some saw only the violence of that morning. Others began looking backward, re-examining months of marriage trouble, coldness, strange tension, and surface reconciliation. The smiling pictures, the warm kitchen scene, the birthday hike, the family messages, none of them disappeared. In fact, they became harder to bear because they now looked like the outer skin of something rotten underneath. What had seemed like healing was, at least in part, concealment. What had looked like a happy marriage from the outside was a structure already cracking from within. What had appeared to be a special day between husband and wife ended as a crime scene on a cliff. In the time that followed, the case would be retold in court through the voices of the people who had lived it and survived it. Emil's trembling recollection of the calls, Ariel's account of what happened on the trail, Judith and Peter's testimony about that day, and the signs that made different sense after the fact. Witnesses, officers, medical staff, step by step, the private horror became public record. By then, one truth stood above all the others. Ariel had survived because she fought with everything she had, because strangers heard her, because help moved fast, and because a few seconds on a mountain shifted in her favor when they might just as easily have gone the other way. The marriage did not survive. The illusion of family safety did not survive. Whatever version of himself Ghard had once presented to the people around him did not survive either. What remained was harder and uglier than anyone wanted, but it was real. One woman alive by inches, one man in custody for trying to kill her, and one family forced to understand that the line between ordinary life and catastrophe can be so thin a person does not see it until they are already falling through. This story is not based on real events. It is a fictional narrative created to explore the darker edges of human emotion, the fragility of trust, and the consequences of unresolved pain within a family. At its core, this story is not just about violence. It is about how appearances can deceive, how a relationship that looks perfect on the outside can quietly fracture beneath the surface, and how silence, resentment, and suspicion, if left unchecked, can grow into something dangerous. It reminds us that love is not sustained by moments, but by honesty, communication, and respect over time. It also speaks to something deeper about survival. Ariel did not survive because she was the strongest person in the world, but because in the worst moment of her life, she refused to give up. Sometimes survival is not heroic or graceful. Sometimes it is desperate, painful, and instinctive. But it matters. And perhaps the hardest truth this story leaves behind is this. The line between a normal life and a life-changing tragedy is often thinner than we think. It can shift in a matter of minutes, in a single decision, in a moment when emotion overrides reason. If this story made you think, feel something, or kept you on edge until the very end, take a moment to share your thoughts. What would you have done in Ariel's place? Do you think there were warning signs earlier? Don't forget to like, comment, and share your perspective.